Jim, just give it to me straight.
Ryan, they're not coming for your alms collector.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, where we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Today, we have a very special episode, and that's because we're going to be talking about the recent announcement from the Rules Committee, and that is the banning of Hullbreacher. So there's a couple of other things we're going to touch on here, but primarily that's really what we're going to be talking about today. It's impacts in the EDH and cEDH metas, and who better do we have to bring on and talk about this today than our good friend Jim. Hey Jim, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great. Thanks for asking. So Jim is a member of the Spike Feeders, a really great YouTube channel. Definitely check them out. There's a link in the description. And also a member of the Commander Advisory Group. So we're going to be talking to him today and asking some questions about basically feelings on this and what led to this decision and some things along that with the color of Commander Advisory Group / just everything in general. So before we talk about that, I want to quickly mention our sponsors. That is TCG Player, that is Dragon Shield, and that is your support from Patreon. So definitely when you're looking to buy product, the adventures in the Forgotten Realms, not of the Forgotten Realms. That keeps getting mixed up from a lot of people. So make sure you buy them from TCG Player. You get cards at really great prices. You still get to support local game stores. When you receive those products, make sure to put them into Dragon Shield. They are our #1 brand for protecting your decks. And then finally, all of the support from viewers like you. Your support on Patreon goes a very long way to help us bring this content to you. We are looking into actually bringing these out to the other podcasting services, Apple iTunes, Spotify, etc., and we could not do that without all of your support on Patreon. So thank you very much for all of that. And also, as a bonus for being a patron member and as part of this podcast, we shout out a member on each episode. And today's Patreon shout out is Victor Chan. So Victor, thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for your support. Without further ado, let's dive into today's topic, and that is the Commander Rules Committee, or RC's, announcement that happened on July 12th. Three main things happened in this announcement. Number one, we have 2 new members of the CAG, or the Commander Advisory Group. That is Kristin, Gregory, and Elizabeth Rice. So Kristin writes for multiple platforms. Her primary mode of content is in the written form. I highly recommend you go check them out. There will be definitely some links in the description. She will be a wonderful addition to the Commander Advisory Group. And another one is Elizabeth Rice. She is a writer and a streamer, and also she plays some pretty high-powered EDH, which is really cool. I think I might need to reach out to her and have her play on an episode of Playing with Power, actually. So, and another one is the dungeon mechanics. There's a small errata to some of the rules to make sure that dungeons work inside of Commander. But the one that has got everybody all aflutter on places like Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and basically just the entire ecosystem is the banning of the card Hullbreacher. All right, so before we go any farther, I want to do 2 things. I want to first talk about what Hullbreacher is by basically just explaining what the card is, and also reading this announcement of Hullbreacher and the RC's decision to ban it. So for those of you who don't know, which is probably like 2 people listening to the podcast, appreciate you 2 people, Hullbreacher is a 2 and a blue for a 3/2 Merfolk Pirate. It has Flash, meaning that you can cast it anytime you could cast an instant. And it has the text, if an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. All right, so 2 and a blue, has Flash, and basically players can't draw a card except for the one they normally draw when they draw for turn. Now, I want to read quickly also what the RC had said as part of their decision to ban this card. And so I'm going to read this basically verbatim. So Hullbreacher has been a problem card since its release. Its ostensible defensive use against extra card draw has been dwarfed by offensively combining it with mass draw effects to easily strip players' hands while accelerating the controller. That play pattern isn't something we want prevalent in casual play, see the Leovold ban. And we have seen a lot of evidence to that it is too tempting even there, as it combines with wheels and other popular casual staples. The case against the card was overwhelming. There remain a few similar cards that are still permitted, notably Notion Thief and Narset Parter of Veils, the additional hoops required, an additional color pip for Notion Thief and sorcery speed for Narset, appear to be keeping them to the appropriate level of play, though we will continue to keep an eye on them. So, Jim, we're going to go ahead and just dive right into the implications of this card and the implications of this ban. So let's just start from the beginning. So you're a member of the Commander Advisory Group. You helped with this decision in one form or another, and we can get into that. But start off from the beginning. What's your position on the Hullbreacher ban?
My position might sound a little bit weird, especially if you kind of take it out of the context of some of the other stuff that I've written and done on our channel about the ban list in general. Particularly, so we'll start by saying I don't think that Hullbreacher necessarily needed to be banned. Okay, and that has like a giant asterisk there. Okay. I don't think it needed to be banned. And the reason being is because I actually have some thoughts on the ban list in general and what it should be used for. So when I say I don't think it needed to be banned, I think that if you are going to use the ban list to comment or to try and influence the way that people play the game, then this is not a terrible decision. It's consistent with the way that the ban list has been used in the past. I think that there are more effective ways that we can use the ban list. And that's, if we were to do that, then Hullbreacher wouldn't be bannable, according to like my ideal state criteria, if that makes sense. So it like maybe is a very complicated way of saying like, I don't think it needed to be banned, but also I think we need to ban cards differently in general. And that's why. You know what I mean? If we're going to continue with the current method of banning, I think it's a fine ban. It is fairly consistent with the Rules Committee's ban list criteria.
Interesting. So that being all said, let's talk about a little bit more about the conversations from a perspective of the Rules Committee and the Commander Advisory Group, which you are a part of. Give us a little bit more flavor about what the context was in regards to Hullbreacher in these ways. What kind of things was advised, what kind of discussions were had, and how did that possibly lead to the eventual announcement that we had?
Yeah, I can't tell you everything about it.
Sure.
Generally, and it's not because like I'm bound to secrecy or something like that. It's just kind of a courtesy to the other people. I don't want to misrepresent their positions on it. So, you know, I don't want to put too many words in other people's mouths. What I can share with you is the structure of the conversations, how we generally talk about these things, as well as my personal input on that, because I'm an expert on what I said, not necessarily on what, Shivam or Josh or anybody else said or thought about this kind of thing.
That's fair.
So, in general, we've got a Discord server that we use for ongoing Rules Committee and CAG joint discussions. So we've got a group. The CAG is now 12 people with our 2 new additions, and then there's 4 people in the Rules Committee. So we've got a Discord server where we talk the 16 of us in a room. And it's an ongoing discussion. So we have a room that's a little bit more casual. If somebody thinks of something, they can toss it in there. Say, hey, did you see this Reddit thread, or did you see this person on Twitter talking about this? And, it's a lot of the time it's like linking to maybe pieces of content, just sort of talking about what the community is talking about and chiming in with our thoughts. That's an ongoing thing. It's not formal. So, I could pick up my phone right now and toss a message in there. We've also got quarterly official meetings where we carve out I've only been involved in 2 because I've only been on the CAG since January. But the 2 that I've been in were about 3 hours long. And they have agendas. They're a little bit more formal. And it's the RC specifically asking for our feedback on specific topics. So, what we're trying to do is getting away from talking about too many new things in these meetings. We're trying to get all that out in the open and talk through things in our ongoing chats so that we can kind of just accurately summarize everybody's feelings and positions on each of these topics during the quarterly meetings, right? So if we say like the quarterly meetings are intended for us to work through all of this stuff, the quarterly meetings are intended to take a snapshot and say, okay, where is everybody at right now? And then that way we can kind of track it over time. Now, in terms of Hullbreacher, I can tell you that Hullbreacher was a card that was brought up like well before this most recent quarterly meeting. It's like it was released before I joined the CAG, and from what I understand, it was talked about a fair bit when it was previewed. You know, you can get a general sense of how each individual person on the CAG feels about this kind of card by looking at their content, looking at their social media and that kind of thing. Like, they're not going to keep their position on this a secret. Like, I remember when Commander Legends got previewed, Josh Lee Kwai talked a whole lot about his thoughts on Hullbreacher, Jeweled Lotus, and Opposition Agent in particular on an episode of the Command Zone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm fairly confident saying this because I'm not putting words in his mouth. It's publicly, you know, available information. But he said this is not the kind of card that Commander really needed or wanted, you know. It's the kind of thing where you might have somebody that designed it with noble intent. And I can definitely tell you that that's the case. I interviewed Glenn Jones last week from WotC's Play or R&D, or Studio X as they're sometimes called, specifically on the Commander team. And Glenn said, you know, we are looking for ways to punish mass card draw because it's a thing that's very strong and mostly unchecked in Commander, right? So it's the kind of thing where I think they're trying new things. Not every single one of them is going to be a home run, right? Some of them might be unplayable. Some of them might be totally busted. Some of them might be just right, you know? The way that Glenn designed it, or the way that Glenn described it in my interview with him was, you know, every once in a while we come up with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that's a little too good, you know? And it's not a matter of peanut butter being a problem or jelly being a problem, but when you combine them together, you get something that is maybe not as predictable. And I mean, we're all able to evaluate these cards in the context of having played them against maybe hundreds of opponents, whereas play design has to guess at a few things, you know, like some of these things. Yeah. Okay. They're predictable to a person that sufficiently understands the format, but you know, I think both you and I have been in situations where we, you know, are looking at something or doing something for content and you're like, oh, this is going to be so cool. And then you put it out and people are like, what are you talking about? This sucks, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I know I've done that with our content and it's not a shock. Well, it can be kind of a shock when it happens, but it's not a shock that it happens. Does that make sense?
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So that's what we generally, I kind of got sidetracked there, but when we're talking about it in the CAG discussions, we do it on an ongoing basis. Just about every card that you can imagine, we talk about, you know, if it's common in the discourse, the capital D discourse online, if you've seen people talking about it and complaining about it online, we've talked about it. You know, like we're all pretty plugged in to these online communities, whether it's, you know, MTG Nexus or Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or wherever, right? Wherever people are having these discussions, we're pretty aware of it. And if there are people bringing forward concerns, whether we agree with them or not, we'll bring it forward to the group for discussion. And then we take a snapshot of it in the quarterly meetings. I can tell you that last quarterly meeting, my feedback to the group was these types of things can be really tough to assess in a quarantine environment. It's pushed a lot of play online. This was probably actually more specific to Opposition Agent and Turgid because those are particularly different when you're playing them online. But, you know, my feedback to them was, I haven't played a game in an LGS in 18 months, you know? It's really tough for me to know whether the online discourse is a good representation of what's going on out there in the real world, right? So that was my recommendation, was I would rather we not do anything until we get a good sense of what's actually going on in real life. Get out there and play some games, go to some events, talk to some people in person and see what that's like. So I think that something to that effect actually made it into the last quarterly update where they said no changes. They were like, hey, we're going to reassess, you know, maybe at a time when some of these LGSs are opening back up. And, you know, I think it actually made it into the announcement. That was kind of still my feedback for this one because Canada is still not totally open. We're kind of on the cusp of it as of today's recording, which is July 14th. We're probably like maybe a few weeks away from that happening, but we're still pretty closed up here. Like things are 50% capacity at most. So that's probably going to continue to be my feedback until I actually get out there. Because like I said, online communities tend to be echo chambers. And, if you want a really particular viewpoint, you can go to Reddit and get it, or you can go to Twitter and get it. But it doesn't mean that it's representative of the entire EDH community.
So in those particular instances, which I completely agree with, by the way, how do you find and extrapolate which data is the data to maybe bring forward? I mean, there's some people that sing the praises of Hullbreacher, whereas others that just curse it and, get, they get very, very dramatic is the best way I can put it, where they say, I'm quitting Magic every time something happens,
Yeah.
How do you decide what to bring forward and what not to? Is there any particular process around that? A little bit ad hoc? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of difficult because I think a lot of people have a concept of what the ban list should be, and that's not necessarily what the ban list is. And I know that that's a fairly controversial thing to say, but the ban list is typically the way that it's been used in the past. And I'm not saying that I agree with this. I'm not saying that this is my ideal state. I'm just saying that this is, historically what it has been. The ban list is typically intended mostly for maybe not new, but like newer and less enfranchised players to ensure that they've got a space where they can play Magic in a particular way. And so the main thing, when you hear people say, this is like EDH is an alternative to tournament Magic, that's something that quite frequently people will say. It's not necessarily tournament Magic is bad. It's not, this is not the way that people should play Magic, anything like that. It's mostly like there is, or at least at the time that EDH was created, or Commander was created, I guess it was EDH at the time, there really wasn't another place to play casual Magic, Like, you could play Kitchen Table Legacy. That's how I played Magic. Kitchen Table Legacy in finger quotes, right? It's not Legacy. It's just
tape
like
1, tape 1.5. Come on.
It's
now.
like
Show your age.
It's like no ban list. Whatever I have in my collection, 75 card casual. Not 60 card casual because I don't make cuts to my deck.
This is too good not to put in here. This Verdant Force is obviously going to win every game. I can't not have.
There's no downside. We just play that and all of my other cards. But there really wasn't another like popular way to play Magic that way, So when they were creating the ban list, they were saying we want to carve out a space where people can do this, and it's not to say other things are bad. It's just like there isn't a place for us to do this, so we want to make sure that this space in particular is okay for me to do that. And so that's where it's when you read articles about the EDH ban list and stuff like that, it's the ban list and the rules from day one have been curated to make sure that it's not a hostile environment for that type of player. And some people look at that as favoritism, and it might be favoritism, like, is it discrimination? Yeah, in the dictionary sense of discrimination, sure it is, right? In that you have to choose between one thing and another thing, not like capital D discrimination like you would talk about with like, racial discrimination. It's not that. It's like small d discrimination, And so that's kind of what the ban list has historically been used for. So what it has been used for is like a guideline for the types of things that tend to cause social friction among strangers, with a focus for making a hospitable environment for a certain type of Magic to be played. Now, I know a lot of people want the ban list to be something else, like a traditional ban list from other formats, curated for competitive balance, removing things from the play pool that, might make it inhospitable for another type of player. And there have been some some sort of glimmers of that in the ban list, but by and large, it's mostly intended to make sure that a certain type of player has a place in the Magic universe to play that specific type of Magic. So, bringing that around to Hullbreacher. Hullbreacher is the type of card that... I'm going to say this. Hullbreacher is the type of card that gets banned. It's like, we know this because it's kind of cut from the same cloth as Leovold, and Leovold was also the type of card that gets banned and was banned. You know, we mentioned in the last talk that you and I had that bans happen extremely infrequently, but if you're paying attention, you can kind of, when cards get previewed, you can look at it and say, like, this is the type of card that gets banned. I said that about Paradox Engine when it was previewed. And it was legal for like 2 years before it got banned.
2 years, yeah.
But when something like Hullbreacher comes up, or something like, I mean, I'm not saying that these cards like are likely to get banned or anything like that, just that they kind of fit the same mold. But things like Turgid, things like, these are like, they're types of cards that are very attractive to certain people. So they get played a lot, but they tend to create a specific environment that's hostile to that type of player that we were talking about before, right? They'll strip you of your resources and make it so that you can't really do anything unless your deck is specifically designed to play against it. That is, by and large, the type of card that gets banned in Commander. Whether or not it actually gets banned, yeah, you know, things like Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, that's the type of card that gets banned. And you can see a lot of examples of it on the ban list. They're types of cards that create a specific type of play experience where people that aren't prepared or consenting to play in that type of environment wish they were doing something else other than playing Magic for the amount of time that they spent playing Magic with you.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is situations that certain cards on the ban list will create that will put some people off of the game. And, you know, some people will make arguments that say, like, oh, well, everyone hates mass land destruction. Why isn't Armageddon on the ban list? You know, everyone hates, you know, hand disruption, you know, and things like that. So why isn't Nicobolus on the ban list? Because you can connect and that person discards their hands. So I really like what you said by, you know, they're using the ban list, but it's not really necessarily a ban list so much as I want to go in so far as to say it's a recommendation or a new player introduction guide, if you will. Yeah. That's a really good way to describe it. It's like they're saying this is the type of stuff, like if you're not familiar with the format, if you're not familiar with the interpersonal dynamics, this is the kind of thing that could cause a social problem if you bust it out on an unexpected, you know, opponent. You know, that's exactly historically what the ban list has been used for. So this card really quickly became a format staple. It was just so easy to slot into decks that had blue. The one blue pip, a lot of people are starting to attribute to the fact that it pushed it over the edge. You know, for example, 2 blue pips, or, you know, maybe if it was in a different color, which we can discuss in a little bit later. Some people are arguing that this card, had it been just created a little differently, just wouldn't have gotten its banned. But as such, it really just became a format staple, definitely in the cEDH, but it also started to bleed its way into more high-powered and casual areas. And I think that on some levels it started to suffer the Paradox Engine problem. And as a quick reference, you know, the Paradox Engine problem was that Paradox Engine was fine in cEDH. People didn't have a problem with it, but it had bled over into the more casual spaces and created unfun play environments because people weren't capitalizing on it in a way that maybe cEDH was. I'm not saying anybody's playing it wrong. Everyone plays how they want to play. I'm saying that it created unfun experiences because of how people were leveraging it. So when you create a situation, in the example of Hullbreacher, where you have somebody playing Hullbreacher plus a wheel or a wheel of reaction, you know, as a flash in a Hullbreacher in reaction to a wheel, you know, cEDH can capitalize on that. However, you know, more casual environments didn't, so you created these Dirtle Fests where nobody had a hand, and, you know, and everyone just had a bad time. So my question to you is, what kind of weight does something like this have on a bearing? What kind of weight does something like this have a bearing on a card's likelihood of being banned? Where it's, cEDH bleeding into, and depending upon where it sits, will kind of will determine what somebody's where somebody's where somebody's opinion is of a card's likelihood to get banned. What are your thoughts on that?
I can definitely tell you that, given our previous description of what the ban list has historically been used for, power level is not necessarily the only thing that matters. I see a lot of people online talking about, there's a bunch of other things that you could be doing that's better than Hullbreacher and wheels and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't really play into it. Again, it's the more like the experience that it creates when something happens, right? So if you like wheel and Hullbreacher somebody and you're playing your casual Locust God deck or whatever, if you're putting everybody into top deck mode and making 20 mana so that you're the only one that can do anything for the next few turns, that's an experience that you're creating at the table. It's not necessarily how close it gets you to winning the game that plays into the ban list discussion. It's what experience are you creating. So I will say that, a lot of people have talked about, well, if things were a little bit different, it's like the whole, butterfly flaps its wings and it creates a much bigger problem, or the episode of The Simpsons where Homer sits on the bug and it's raining donuts,
Yeah.
But like the one thing, there's sort of a confluence of factors that happened with Hullbreacher. Number one, it was in a commander set. And I know a lot of people have pointed to this as a reason why it didn't get banned earlier. I can definitely tell you that did not come up in the CAG discussions, at least. I can't tell you whether it came up in the Rules Committee discussions. I would be shocked if it came up in the Rules Committee discussions. I know one of the common narratives is that the Rules Committee is in the pocket of Wizards of the Coast and they wouldn't ban it because it's bad business and all that kind of stuff.
Oh.
If I can definitely tell you that Wizards of the Coast wants Commander to be healthy. And that if something is damaging to Commander, they want it removed from the format, whether it came in a Commander focus set or not. I would say that is actually one of the factors that pushed it towards being banned, because it was marketed towards Commander players. If it was a set that was marketed towards modern players, legacy players, whatever, and it just happened to get picked up by Commander players, it might have even been a different situation, because you might not have had a new player walking in saying, oh, there's a Commander set, and cracking one and putting it in an upgraded precon and subjecting their friends to a situation where they can never draw cards again. That is a different pattern of consumer behavior than, this, you can only crack this card in, double masters because the packs are $30 each or whatever. Like, that's a different demographic that they're marketing to. And I think it causes fewer problems at the types of casual tables that we're talking about, But given that it was a Commander focused set, a lot of these were showing up in lower power decks because people bought a lot of Commander Legends, and it was people from across the power level spectrum, not just cEDH people. So I don't even think it was a matter of like cEDH tactics like bleeding out into casual gameplay, because this is not a new play pattern, right? Like, people have been doing Wheel and Notion Thief. Like, Opus Thief is an old deck, right? Like, it's not since Commander Legends. Obviously, this kind of threw it into overdrive because every time they get a wheel payoff, the deck gets better, because it's more redundant pieces and all that kind of thing. But people weren't playing Notion Thief and Wheels in decks like 2 years ago, not in casual, right? Yep. Like, it just wasn't a prominent play pattern. You might get it every once in a while, but the combination of like marketed to the type of people, the maybe not ignorance. I don't think ignorance is the right word, but the lack of ability to anticipate the social reaction is a thing. Right? Like, one of the things that actually ties a lot of the cards on the ban list together is that when new players look at the cards, they don't understand why they're a problem. And you see this with a lot of things. I remember. So this is a baby Jim anecdote here, right?
Oh, that's nice.
The first time I ever read Necropotence, I was like, why would I ever pay life to draw cards? I can literally just pass the turn and draw a card on my next draw step, you know? Why would I ever pay life for that? You know, life is important. I need life to live. Mm-hmm. And obviously, that's not an accurate assessment of the power level of Necropotence. But it's also a very common assessment of the power level of Necropotence. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can grab a copy of Inquest magazine and find exactly that assessment when Inquest rated it like 1 out of 5 stars.
Yep.
You know? So it's that like inability to assess a card's true power level without having actually played it that ties together a lot of the cards on the ban list. And it's not necessarily power level, but like what happens when you cast Scheherazade in a game? Right? You might think it's like cool and quirky and stuff like that, but the person who's like, you know, maybe this is their only time they're going to get to play Magic this month doesn't want to spend it playing 10 sub games of Magic, you know, because you're going to, you know, go through and wish for it from the previous, you know, stack or whatever. Like one person might think it's cool and quirky. It's an attractive card that a certain type of player likes to play, but they don't often put two and two together in their head about the social environment that they're creating by playing it. And so that's one of the things that really pushed Hullbreacher towards being bannable, is that the social experience wasn't enough to deter people from playing it. It was still an extremely attractive card. And that's where it maybe sets itself apart from other cards. Like actually Vorinclex is a really good example, right? Vorinclex also creates that kind of a thing, but it's not like rampant in the format. It's not the kind of thing where you're going to see 3 of them if you go to an average EDH night at your LGS. You might, but that would be an uncommon thing to happen, you know? So it's not necessarily just the card. It's more, what is the problem that's creating in the community? And is this problem being created because people can't accurately assess other people's reactions, or maybe that they don't care about other people's reactions to the card, and that's a problem too.
Speaking of accurate assessments, this is a really good place to talk about a lot of people's arguments against the ban. The classic argument you will always see whenever you talk about a proponent against the ban is just run interaction. I say with the biggest quotes I can say. Like, it's ridiculous how many times I see that. It's the just run interaction or it dies to removal argument. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to anybody who gives these types of arguments to the idea that Hullbreacher needs to stay off the ban list because of this? What would you say to people like that?
I would say that just run more interaction or, you know, dies to removal is not an argument against keeping Hullbreacher legal or against banning Hullbreacher. Dice to removal or run more interaction is an argument against banning cards, period. And if that's your intent, then that's fine. But you got to understand, like, Time Vault, you know, dies to interaction, right? And like Time Walk can be countered. Black Lotus can be countered. Would you counter Black Lotus? Maybe. I don't know. Is that good? Who knows? It's true, though, of all of these things that, like, you know, Time Vault is not an okay card because you can abrade it, you know? So if your argument is we shouldn't have a ban list, then sure, that's a fine argument for we shouldn't have a ban list. Okay, you know, you got me. If your argument is that Hullbreacher specifically is okay because it's vulnerable to removal, I don't think that's okay. That's true of Gristlebrand, it's true of Prophet of Krufix, it's true of Paradox Engine, it's true of literally everything, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that I think people frequently offer that up like flippantly, but also they don't necessarily understand. So when I say I don't like Hullbreacher, right? Like, that's not my personal opinion, but if I were to say I don't like Hullbreacher, mm-hmm. What I'm not saying is I don't understand how to play against Hullbreacher. That's not what I'm saying when I say I don't like it, right? But play more removal or play more interaction is a solution to I don't understand how to play against it. So it can come across a little patronizing, is that, like, if you're talking to an experienced player that has playstyle preferences, right? Like, I don't like playing against stacks, right? A lot of people will say I don't like playing against stacks. Yep. If an experienced player says I don't like playing against stacks and the response is play more removal, like, yeah, I get it. Playing more removal would mean that I'm better at playing against stacks, right? Like, I know that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying I need help in deck building, right? I'm saying I have a playstyle preference, and this ain't it, you know? So I think that there's a lot of conflict that's created when somebody is expressing a playstyle preference and they're met with deck building advice that they didn't ask for. I think for that it's a problem. Because that's not the solution to the problem that they're expressing. The solution to the problem that they're expressing is, I wish people would, consider my play experiences, right? And maybe they are, I don't know. Or maybe I wish people were better at communicating what their deck does before the game. Or maybe I wish, when we're playing games with strangers, I wish there was a better way to talk about what we like and what we don't like, And the answer to that is not play more removal. So I don't know. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah. I will also add the caveat from not even your point, which was a fantastic point, by the way, is there is something very special about Hullbreacher that compounds this problem, is because you say play more interaction, right? Hullbreacher doesn't let you dig for your interaction. It stops you from drawing a card.
Yep.
So you can only draw one card per turn. So if it wasn't sitting there in your hand, how are you going to find it? Oh, now you're going to tell me to start running more tutors too? What else would you like to tell me about how I should build my deck? Like you said, deck building advice. So there's this even that argument was dwarfed by Hullbreacher. That's how problematic this card really technically was here.
Well, we talked about that with Thassa's Oracle too, right? The overarching trend of card design for immediate value from creatures, right, is that like by the time you untap for removal, like as if you happen to tap out or you happen to only have sorcery speed removal or whatever, they've already done the thing, right? They don't care if you've removed Hullbreacher if they've stripped your hand and they've got 20 treasures. That has earned its keep, Yeah, it's already like a plus 20 card advantage play plus 20 mana advantage play. Like it's earned its keep by the time you untap and have removal for it. So, okay, if you want to play more instant speed creature removal, fine, whatever. That is a valid way to play against it. But the solution to things in EDH is not always, learn how to better play against it. It's a valuable skill, and I do encourage people to understand how to do these types of things. But sometimes they don't want to. Sometimes that's not the type of environment they want to play in. Like Shivam, one time I was talking to him about this, and he said, I don't like Shivam doesn't like playing against stacks, but he also told me I don't like playing in environments where I feel like I need to play stacks to do anything relevant in the game. I don't want to, he knows how to, he's not dumb. He knows how to play stacks, but he doesn't want to be in a situation where he feels like that's the only way he can meaningfully contribute to a game because it's not his preferred playstyle, So it's not so much a matter of Shivam needs to learn how to play stacks. It's more like Shivam needs to find people that don't play decks that Shivam would have to play stacks against to play against.
It's an interesting anecdote because I have a situation in our own play group where we were starting to branch into just high-powered casual. We wanted to step away from cEDH a bit and just kind of get into the fun, haymaking, swinging kind of games, which, a lot of people like. And we found ourselves in a situation where everyone was creating these massive storm turns or taking forever to do what they wanted because everything was just so many complicated board states that I found myself saying, you know what, we really need to slow this down. And I found myself starting to build a stack, with rule of law effects and stuff like that to say this thing needs to slow down because we're creating a pattern where everybody's just taking up all this, taking the entire game time watching somebody else play. And that goes perfectly into your point where it's like, well, what you really need is something that is more conducive to your play style.
Yeah.
We found out we really didn't like playing in an environment like that. That's what it ended up being. And it's really astute, and that's a really cool way to view something like that. So, all right. So a next point is Sheldon was talking about how wheels were problematic for the format. So we're just going to circle back around here to the RC and the CAG discussions. And he specifically said, I'll bring it up here real quick. This was in a previous article of his. The link is in the description for the full article. And it says, Modern Horizons 2 reinforces that wheels are the unhealthiest thing in Commander. This is of a deep concern to me and is going to undergo a great deal of thought. Banning an entire class of cards, i.e. wheel effects, is awkward at best, potentially politically suicidal at its worst. I know that folks love wheels, so it gets even more difficult. There seem like no good answers at the moment, but I'd really like to look for them. And then he goes on. So, then shortly after this happened, shortly being a relative term, Hullbreacher got banned, the wheel payoff quintessential card. So this could be definitely seen as a direct correlation here. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've actually talked to Sheldon about this quite a bit. This is one of the core topics that kind of spurred my interview with him and Glenn Jones. Was like, what do you do? What do you do? Like, what's the ban list for here? Is this the type of problem that the ban list should be used to solve? And then is it a problem, right? So with wheels in particular, I think that a lot of people kind of glossed over what Sheldon was kind of getting at. It was definitely a provocative statement, right? It would be like saying, you know, I think everybody should paint their front door blue or whatever, right? Like, well, why? Right?
That was very tame. That was a very tame way to put it, because of people's reactions were...
Yeah, okay.
They were intense. They were some intense reactions. People were... their hair was on fire.
Yeah, a lot of people, like, zoned in on the idea of banning wheels. And they said, well, wheels aren't problematic. And they're not. That's the thing, right? Like, wheels in a vacuum are not problematic. They're like draw 7, they're symmetrical. Like, you know, depending on the way that you look at card advantage, they're card disadvantage. If you're giving your opponents each 7 cards, you're only drawing 7, you're down like 14 cards. You're like refilling people's hands for interaction and more fast mana and all this kind of stuff. It accelerates the game. You got to have something to do with it, right? If you're playing it effectively. But since, like, not even since Leovold, but like since Notion Thief, there's been kind of slow additions to the format of things that don't play well with wheels. And when I say don't play well, I mean under the current definition of what the ban list is for, don't play well. Like, they create these social environments with strangers that are like not desirable play environments, right? And they're very effective if you use them with wheels in, like, say, cEDH decks, right? Like, Opus Thief, like, not even just Opus Thief, like a lot of other decks have adopted that, you know, 1-2 combo of like wheel plus wheel payoff. And it's, the writing is on the wall that R&D wants to punish mass card draw somehow, right? Like, Leovold was a way to do that. Narset is a way to do that. Hullbreacher is a way to do that. Turgid is a way to do that. Like, well, so I guess Turgid doesn't really punish the card draw, but definitely Narset and Hullbreacher are perfect examples of them wanting to do this. And I think it's a reasonable thing to try and attack, because it is like an incredibly powerful thing to do. This is why, you know, Tatyova and Hullen and like Korvold and all these decks are powerful. As why they're format boogeymen is because they have great ways of drawing a bunch of cards by doing stuff that you already want to do in a game. Right?
That you already do anyway. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, like, from R&D's perspective, they're like, well, we need meaningful counterplay to this. So they print these cards. They know that they don't interact favorably, or that they don't, or sorry, I should say that they do interact favorably with wheels as an offensive weapon, and not necessarily just in the intended use case of, like, I'm going to flash in Hullbreacher when you go to draw 10 cards off of whatever, you know, Korvold, sack your treasures or something like that, right? So when Sheldon says maybe we need to look at wheels, it's because the number of wheels stays relatively constant over time, or at least the number of effective wheels that can be used offensively, right? Like, the list is short. It's Wheel of Fortune, it's Windfall, it's like maybe Winds of Change, and like maybe that's it.
Some small things like Burning Inquiry, and then there's some edges like Teferi's Puzzle Box and Mind Moil, Arjun, the Shifting.
I think even those, once you get to 5 mana, it's pretty tough to do it all in the same turn. You know, you kind of have to telegraph it. And I mean, I guess Hullbreacher has flash, so you could like flash in Hullbreacher on tap and then play Mind
step and then do it.
Right?
That's exactly right.
You know, but with these things in particular, like those are the subset of cards, the ones that can be weaponized with these wheel payoffs to create these game states, right? So the thought is, okay, if we take a step back and we say the problem is with this particular card interaction, everybody's focusing on the wheel payoffs, but we're going to be getting more wheel payoffs, right? Like they're coming. R&D has told us, and they've telegraphed with printing these cards, that this is something they're going to do. It's design space they're going to explore. So if we can solve this entire problem by saying, let's get rid of Wheel of Fortune and Windfall and Winds of Change, right? 3 cards. Do we then avoid having to ban 1 or 2 cards a year from now until whenever R&D is done with this trend of printing this type of card? Or do we just keep popping off the wheel payoffs as they come up if they're proven to create that kind of a game state? So it wasn't necessarily like a, this is what we should do, but like a, this is an alternate way to look at this problem and another potential solution. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good solution. It's just sort of a solution, you know? I think, based on my interview with Sheldon and Glenn, that's like not the preferred solution, especially given the rules committee's tendency to ban cards as like a signpost or an exemplar for other things. Banning wheels doesn't tell people don't play wheels with payoffs. It just tells people don't play wheels. It's not an easily understandable message that they're sending by banning these cards. The message that they end up sending if they were to ban Wheel of Fortune is don't play Wheel of Fortune,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily the problem that we're talking about here, So even among the subset of players that we're looking to like guide or shepherd into unfamiliar social environments, it doesn't serve that group fairly well because it doesn't teach them about what that problem is. It just removes the card from the play pool, Yeah, that's probably a better like encapsulation of what Sheldon was actually talking about based on how he's explained it to me and based on how we've talked about it with R&D. But these types of bannings can also serve as a signpost to R&D. And that's where these types of things can actually send a pretty effective message. Because if, we ban a Hullbreacher, we can say to R&D, these are the things that made this card problematic, Like, if it didn't have flash, it might have been fine. If it was 2 colors, it might have been fine. If it was white, it might have been fine. If it didn't replace the card draw, it would have been fine. If it was like the Notion Thief, any card but the first card they draw in their draw step, or any card but the first card they draw each turn, that would have been fine. If it was Alms Collector, where it didn't give you such an overwhelming advantage for doing it, it wouldn't have been as attractive, So that's the kind of thing where you can actually get a whole lot of nuanced messaging to R&D about what specifically made this card problematic so that they don't like step in it again, right? What we want is for R&D to learn a lesson here to say, this is the type of card that gets banned in Commander and you've created it by accident. Please don't do this again because it's destabilizing to the format.
I definitely think that would be a really advantageous way to use the ban list, and there's probably some discussions that could come out of that because sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you are making the ban list do double and triple duty, and then it might lose its identity at that point. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted to talk and compound. I guess I want to also explore what you said about, well, next time another one comes up, just snipe it off. And that is something that we are starting to see here. Leovold got banned. Hullbreacher came out. Hullbreacher got banned. So is this something that we need to continually keep rectifying? How do you feel about something like that? And before you answer, let me give some quick context. Worldfire is banned. Sway of the Stars is banned. These are classic cards that one would describe as everything you did up until this point didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Now the game is the game. Worldfire, everything's gone, everyone's at 1 life. Sway of the Stars, everything's gone, and everyone's at, I think, 7 life or something like that. And so the game didn't matter up until this point. Another card that is like that is Apocalypse. Exile all permanents, discard your hand. That one is not on the ban list. So, but the other 2 are. So talk to me about you know, the concept of maybe in a little bit more detail of the sniping the wheels bad, quote unquote, you know, bad with wheels or weaponizing wheels. Is this something we see that you're always going to keep sniping them off, or do you think this is enough, or do you see a trend starting? Maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
So I am fairly skeptical about the value of exemplar bannings. I think at one point they probably served a more effective purpose than they do today. And that point was when the format was smaller, when more people looked to the rules committee directly for, input on the philosophy, that kind of thing. When the messaging was more consistent among new players. Now, new players enter the format from everywhere you can possibly imagine. They pick up a precon from an LGS. They might, pick it up from a friend who explains it by word of mouth. They might be a pro player from another format who decides to check it out because they think, that's where good content is made or whatever, Like there's a ton of different ways that you can get into Commander, and not all of them flow through the rules committee, right? So the rules committee actually doesn't have a ton of tight control over how the format is described to new players, right? So you don't have people that are like, gurus of the ban list that say, okay, well, this is why Sway of the Stars is banned. All they see is this card is banned, or they go to try and buy it and the LGS employee says, oh, that card's banned, you can't put that in your EDH deck. Or they're like putting together a deck list on Moxfield or whatever, and it gets highlighted because it's banned, right? That's how they discover that these cards are banned. Or what they might do is actually buy it and put it in their deck and play it against their friends, and then they say, you know what, that card's banned, you can't play that card, But that doesn't come with, 4 of Sheldon's articles about the history and philosophy of the format and the type of experience that they're trying to cultivate, right? It's just this card is banned in Commander. So I'm fairly skeptical about the value of bans as a signpost to the community. I don't think, I do honestly think that the rules committee has a reason. I understand and even agree with some of the reasons why these cards are banned, but I'm skeptical that the message that they're trying to send with the ban list is being understood and decoded properly by the people that are reading it. You don't get a copy of the philosophy document in a precon, So that being said, I tend to be fairly anti-ban, but specifically the types of bans that act as signposts for other cards. I think that the value of the ban list is in actually making changes to player behavior. So this card needs to be removed from the pool because it's causing a real problem. And if it wasn't there, that problem wouldn't exist. I think that that's the extent of the rules committee's influence over playstyles, is by actually removing things from the card pool. So in terms of Hullbreacher, the reason why I said, I don't think it needed to be banned is that I don't think we necessarily need to take a stand on that particular play pattern. But if the objective is to take a stand on that particular play pattern, Hullbreacher is actually a pretty good way to do that because it removes a real thing that is happening to people. It's actually having an impact on the way that people play the game. So my stance on it is not so much I don't think it needed to be banned. I don't think it needed to be banned, but if this is what you're going to do, it's actually a pretty okay ban. So I'm not going to stand in your way, but I'm not going to be yeah, let's get rid of it.
So Hullbreacher was released in Commander Legends back in November of last year, and now here we are in July, and Hullbreacher was obviously banned. So that's less than a year turnaround. I have 2 questions for you. Number 1, elaborate a little bit more about your ideas or thoughts on the idea of Commander-specific products getting banned, whether there's philosophies around that or what your opinions are. And second, how do you feel about the time frame? This didn't live very long. We've seen other ones live very long. We've seen some live very short. Looking at you, Lutri, they had a -4 days or something. It wasn't even legal and it was banned. Whereas things like Paradox Engine, which got to quote unquote run rampant, did so for 2 years. This one got less than a year. So talk to me about the Commander Legends specific, and then also the time frame before it was actually banned.
Yeah, so Commander Legends in particular, I actually don't see a problem with banning cards that are in Commander specific sets. It gets a little trickier when they're in precons, because the implication is that when you buy a precon, you can open it up and play it at Commander Night at your LGS. So things like Gifts Ungiven, You know, that was in a precon. That one's actually a tougher sell for me. I do think that actually should come into play. I think that there's a reasonable expectation that if a new player buys a pre-constructed deck, that they can play it out of the box. I think that that's a totally reasonable expectation. But like in a commander booster pack or whatever, like it's a little less, it's a little tougher of a sell for me to say like, you know, we shouldn't ban this because it's marketed to commander players. I think if you're not like guaranteed to get one, then I don't know. I don't think that the implication is quite as strong that you'll be able to play everything. It's still there for sure because it's got commander on the name of the booster pack, but I don't think it's like a guarantee that you can like unbox this thing. You have to like put some work. There's intermediary steps there, you know? So I don't think that that's a problem. I don't think that that should play into whether a card is bannable or not. I think that you're probably more likely to have cards that are bannable in a commander focused set because they're trying to push card design to make interesting cards. That's why, you know, Hogak got banned in Modern. You know, Arkham's Astrolabe, was that banned in Modern or just in Legacy?
Sorry, I'm not a big Modern player. I
apologize neither am I.
To our
but I know, like,
our fellow Modern viewers.
But Hogak is a prime example, right? Like, they're trying to push the envelope and do something creative that is going to shake up the Modern meta. That's, like, what Modern Horizons is for. Mm-hmm. And in the process, not all of these are going to be home runs. Like I said, you know, it's not always predictable. Sometimes you just end up with weird stuff going on, right? Like the people that designed Skull Clamp, right? Like they said, well, that -1, you know, the +1/-1 is going to be a drawback, but it wasn't, you know, like should they have predicted that? Probably. Did they? No. So you kind of got to clean up after, you know? And the same thing happens with Commander. I don't think that there's a problem at all with banning something from a Commander focus set if it's a real problem. Now, in terms of time frame, I've heard actually a lot of things. In terms of context, you mentioned a couple other cards. Leovold was banned around the same time. So Commander Legends was what, November, right? Came out in November?
Yep.
So we're like right around the 6.5 or I guess 7.5 month mark.
Ish. Yep.
And Leovold, I believe, got about 8 months, if I'm not mistaken. Paradox Engine, like you mentioned, got 2 years, almost 2.5 years.
Yeah, it was a couple years.
But like right around the like 6 months to a year mark is when people really start talking about that, about cards being a real persisting problem in the format. The reason why Lutri was so unusual and so exceptional in terms of banning is because the Commander Rules Committee likes to give cards time in the wild to see if they're real problems or academic problems, right? Like, we can go through and we can say, you know, on preview day, Jeweled Lotus is a problem. Tons of people were calling for Jeweled Lotus to be banned, right?
I believe that. Yep.
I don't remember the last time somebody asked me for Jeweled Lotus to be banned. It certainly hasn't been in the last 4 months. So the public outrage kind of peters off on a lot of cards. And you kind of, you know, it's a matter of taking a look at which ones it's dying down on and which ones it's not, or which ones it's escalating. And that's where you start to see the cards that the Rules Committee typically sees as problematic. If the community sorts them out on their own and they don't become problems, the absolute preferred path is to let people play their cards, right? Like, if people are outraged about something on preview day and it doesn't become a problem 6 months after the fact, I'm glad that we didn't ban it on preview day because it wouldn't have been a problem, right? The downside on that is that it can kind of lull people into a false sense of security and say, well, you know, if it was banned, it would have been banned by now. Like, I remember
you, Masterpiece
Paradox Engine. I have one of those. Yeah, I had a Masterpiece Paradox Engine that got banned. I played it quite a bit. I played Nin Monolith, and Paradox Engine was a big part of that because it was an Isochron Scepter list. And yeah, so a lot of people... I actually didn't buy a Paradox Engine because when it got previewed, I'm like, that's the kind of card that gets banned. You know? Mm-hmm. I'm like, it absolutely is. I like shot called. I was like, that card's going to get banned. I'm not going to buy it. And then like after a year, the price is going up. After a year and a half, price is going up. And then at one point I'm like, you know what? Fine. I'll bite the bullet and I'll buy a Paradox Engine. And I'm like, I'm going to buy a nice one. Because that's typically what I do is I buy like one nice version of the card. Okay. And I put it in my deck and I got to play with it for probably 6 or 7 months or something like that. And then it got banned. And I'm like, well, damn, you know? And it sucks. It does suck to have a card that you've bought get banned out from under you, especially if it's like a cornerstone of your deck, right? Like, you know, hopefully it's not like your commander that gets banned, because it really sucks to build a Leovold deck for like $1,000 and then find out that you don't have a commander to run it, you know? That really sucks. Yeah. Paradox Engine, I was like, okay, I just replaced it with a Mana Rock, you know? Like, yeah, I'm out the, whatever it was, $130 or something that I spent on this Paradox Engine. But, you know, I still played it in Canlander and stuff like that. But it does suck to get a card banned. I've heard people that had, you know, 20 copies of Hullbreacher for different decks and all that kind of thing, and they got banned out from under you. And like, that's a good chunk of change. It really is, you know? And I can tell you that, like, when you're talking to WotC or even to some extent the Rules Committee, there's a hesitance to talk about the secondary market and to acknowledge the value that goes away when cards get banned. I have no reservations about talking about that. I do acknowledge the fact that it sucks. It is a consequence of banning a card. It is not a consideration in banning a card. You know, if Wheel of Fortune was legitimately a problem in the format and needed to be banned, it would be banned. And that, you know, doesn't matter if it's a $1 card or a $1,000 card. If it's a problem, it will be banned. So I would definitely, you know, if anybody out there is looking at commander cards as an investment or something like that, you know, don't buy cards with money that you can't afford to lose. If you really care about the financial value of your cards, it could go away by getting banned. It's unlikely. Like we've talked in the last episode about how often bannings happen. It's extremely unlikely that a card is going to get banned, but it could. So it's something to acknowledge.
Yeah, we talked about that in the last episode, and there was like somewhere in the vicinity, I believe you said, excluding excluding the culturally insensitive ones or whatever, there was like 5 bans in 5 years.
Yeah.
So this does mark the 6th one in 5 years, essentially. And some would see that as a lot, and some would see that as not a lot. So it really just depends on your perspective. And you have a very good point when you say, you know, it does. It's a real bummer when all of that value evaporates overnight. You said that you guys don't take that into consideration. I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good idea, personally. Considering somebody's, well, I don't want to ban it because, you know, it's a $300 card and somebody keeps buying it. I've seen post after post here with the Hullbreacher ban that says, oh, I just bought my foil widescreen edition one, and or I just bought my, you know, I just bought one yesterday. I bought a playset for all my decks, and which goes into the idea that it was really becoming a format staple, and also the idea that its value, this decision evaporated a ton of value overnight, is what it did. It just made this card, I don't know what the value is right now, but it's bad. Yeah. So
I think it went, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't checked yet today, but it went from about $25 to about $5, the regular version. So
exactly, you know, $25 for the regular version of this card down to $5 immediately. That's a tough pill to swallow. Yep. You know, especially if you had multiple. So while some people might take issue with the fact that you are playing with their money, because that's how some people are going to see it, I still think it's a good stance for you guys to take. I think it's smart.
and like at the end of the day too, the health of the format is more important than the investment in any individual card, because if the alternative is that the format is not healthy and people stop playing it, the value of all of your cards will go away. You know, like if you don't have people to play Commander against, and if you don't have people excited about building Commander decks, your cards will not be worth what they're worth right now. I can guarantee that. If the format sucks and people stop playing it, a lot of your card value will go away. So to me, even if you look at it from a financial perspective, it is much more beneficial for us to cultivate a healthy format. And I mean, people, you know, are divided on whether or not that's actually what we're doing, is cultivating a healthy format. But that is more important than any particular card being legal.
Yeah, something needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Yep. So I think it was Han Solo that said that. Just kidding. I just wanted to make a whole bunch of people angry for it.
It was actually Hermione Granger, I'm pretty sure.
That's it, Hermione Granger. In Lord of the Rings, right? Okay, so all right. So let's talk about community reception. without saying anything one way or another yet, because I have my thoughts on it and I have read a bunch of feedback from the community across content and posts and stuff like that, what has been your reception of this ban so far in your ecosystem?
I would say neutral to positive. And I count... there's a really interesting response that I've gotten a lot of, which is like, I disagree with it, but I understand it. Or like, I'm sad about it going away, but I get it. I'm counting those as neutral responses. Mm-hmm. You know, you probably could count those as negative. If you did, then that would change my answer. But I would say if you count those as neutral, then the response has been overwhelmingly neutral to positive. There have been a few people that have reached out to me that said, you know, I'm really disappointed in this. I really like playing this card and all this kind of stuff. And they are there. This is not unanimously positive. I would say that most of the responses have been overall positive. And granted, my audience probably skews a little bit more casual than your audience. But my audience also skews a little more competitive than the average audience, I think. So it's that's where a lot of people have come to me. Yeah, I would say neutral to positive.
So I would definitely agree when you say that mine skews more competitive. However, we definitely have a casual player base that watches our videos and consumes our content. And by the way, we are grateful for every one of you. However, we have put out a couple of polls. We've asked some general questions. We kind of put our feelers out there to see how people are. And I would agree with you. Even skewing on the competitive side, people are saying, people are a little bit more even-keeled or level-headed about it. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are some seedy corners of the internet where people are getting their pitchforks and saying format split, but they say that with every single ban that ever comes out.
I think even on like on the EDH subreddit, which tends to be fairly critical of the rules committee, you know, whether you agree with that or not, it's just an observation. I think that the Reddit community is typically quite critical of the rules committee. Even the EDH community is pretty positive on this, I think. I read the threads, and there's, you know, I waded through the hundreds of comments on both the cEDH subreddit and the EDH subreddit, and they're largely positive.
They are. And that I find very interesting, because before we had a couple other bans that happened. And the ones of note were the ones that I would say that skew towards the cEDH side. And I would definitely consider this more of a cEDH skew with Hullbreacher, because cEDH definitely used it in offensive ways. It is 100% what they were doing it. You know, they weren't trying to, you know, get you on a brainstorm. No, they were trying to strip your hand out and win the game.
Ooh,
so
that happened once. I was playing with Rebel and Alan from Meant to Misplay. And I forget who the last person in the pod was. But somebody cast Brainstorm and somebody flashed in Hullbreacher in response, which is devastating, by the way.
It really is.
And there was
cards on top. Oh, that's brutal.
And there was an enormous counterspell war, and I won after it because everybody was exhausted on this stupid Brainstorm. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No, that's absolutely true. As a bit of context, we had a situation. So two things. Number one, we had a game that we recorded, playing with power, somebody Mana Crypt Island turn 1, and somebody Time Twistered turn 1. No joke, they flashed in Hullbreacher, the opponent did. We stopped recording. We quit the game.
Yeah, it's not entertaining, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, from a gameplay standpoint and an entertainment standpoint, it was neither. Yeah. We absolutely just stopped playing. We said, you've got one turn to win, is what we told them.
Yeah.
Because he had a billion treasures, and we sat here with no hands. He's like, "Oh, you don't want to keep playing?" I said, "No,
game's over.
I don't want to play."
Game's over.
And so
right?
I said, "Yep, you've got one turn rotation to win." And he drew the cards, and I said, "Do you have a way to win right now?" And he said, "No, I don't." I said, "Stop recording."
That's a tough position to be in as a content creator, hey? Like because like your time is really valuable when you're recording, right? It's tough enough, like very much. For anybody that's in the audience that's listening that maybe doesn't understand what we're talking about here. Think about how tough it is to get somebody to get 4 people together for like a weekly D&D session, or like a weekly board game session or whatever. Like to not only just to get them together, but like to agree. Wednesday nights at 5:00, we're going to play D&D, right?
Yep.
That's what it's like trying to organize, a group of 6 or 7 people such that 4 of them can show up for a filming day that might take 6 or 8 hours to hammer out 3 or 4 games on camera, right? Mm-hmm. If you commit a large portion of your day to a game that is not going to be usable, it sucks. It sucks. Mm-hmm. It puts me in such a bad mood where we're like, well, we just spent 2 hours and the overhead camera battery died or something like that. And we can't use that game,
Flashbacks.
Like, that puts you in a miserable mood. And something like that where you're just like, you know what? Even if this game goes well, it's probably going to suck to the point where we don't want to release it, or we're not going to be proud of it if we release it. And at that point, like, kudos to you for recognizing it, because, those games tend to take a long time too. And you're just like, well, that just wasted like 1 out of the 4 games that we could have recorded today. But if you pull the plug early and you say, you know what, we're not going to use that one, then you might even be able to get another game in.
Exactly, and that's why we did it. We said, nope, this game's dead. There's no way that anyone's going to like watching draw pass, and you do 1,000 things. Yep. So we just stopped.
Well, especially in your format too, right? Like where you have to narrate it. It's like, well, Ryan draws a card and passes the turn.
Untaps, draws, does nothing else, passes.
Mike draws a card and passes the turn.
Yeah. Oh man, riveting content. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing was the longest game of cEDH we ever recorded, which was 5.5 hours long, was because of Hullbreacher.
Yep.
Bar none.
Yep.
And so, yeah, definitely. All right. Well, anyway, back to our talking. All right, so I have definitely found that the feedback from the community has been actually very positive, and I would even use the terms that you said, the neutral to positive. I have not seen, which I have seen in the past, which is the things that were more of a cEDH ban or more maybe skewed on the side of cEDH. I'm talking specifically about Flash and Paradox Engine. There was a big divide in the community, and I'm not seeing that with Hullbreacher. Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing this, everyone get up in arms and we need to create a new format, and I'm so sick of the RC and they just don't understand us, and I'm not seeing that out in the ecosystem. I'm not seeing it in the Twitterverse or anything like that. I think that's really good.
Yeah. I will say I got one weird, like I've had a couple people say to me, and this is weird, and I actually don't understand it. I would love to understand it. So if this is you that thinks this, hit me up in the comments, because I genuinely want to understand this. Mm-hmm. I have had a couple people, more casual-minded people, who have approached me thinking that this was a cEDH ban, and I don't, like, that wasn't the case. It wasn't like cEDH people lobbying. It was like Flash Hullbreacher is not, like this was not cEDH people lobbying for this to be banned. Me personally, I was not out there banging the drum to get this card banned. My reaction was exactly what we said at the beginning of this episode. I don't think it needs to be done, but if you're going to do it, it's not the worst thing you could be doing, Mm-hmm. And so I have had a couple of people say to me, well, I'm sick of cEDH, doing all this kind of stuff. And it might just be a general sentiment that they're sick of cEDH, which there are people out there that are like that. But
sure.
But I got the sense from talking to these people that they thought that cEDH had something to do with this ban. And I don't know if it's like, this strategy originated in cEDH and, like you said, kind of leaked out into the rest of the format. I don't know if maybe they're thinking like this is a play style that wouldn't exist without cEDH people or whatever, or that it's cEDH people that are ruining casual players' games by using this cEDH strategy in casual play. That definitely wasn't the case. I can tell you that, like 100%. I think quite frequently this was just people honestly thinking that it was a cool card and not realizing that it's kind of miserable to play against.
Yeah. Me personally, I saw this card getting banned before it even happened. I can remember back to times when I was playing and recording and actually saying to my play group and saying under my breath, I can't wait till this card is gone. That is my personal opinion. I am glad this card is gone. And what I thought was interesting was that other members of the cEDH community agreed with me. Yep. They were saying things like, I'm glad that there's no longer there. I will put some links in the descriptions to different things where people are like, at worst they're neutral. They're saying things
Yeah.
like, well, I understand why this makes more sense. A much more even keel, a much more level-headed response. A comedian from MTG said, hey, this completely rendered one of my decks useless, and I think it's good because it, like you said, it encouraged a playstyle that people didn't like, and it created a situation where it was very ubiquitous in the cEDH scene. You're running into 3 Hullbreachers a game where everyone's constantly like, I don't know if I should cast this. He's got 2 and a blue up, and so he might just get me, and then I'm just done at that point, and the whole game's over. People are getting very afraid of that, and it started to steer away certain strategies. Pure Into the Abyss got played a little bit less. Because it was draw and not reveal.
Yep.
Wheels were being played with a lot more caution than they used to be, and there are people out there in the cEDH scene, cEDH itself, where nothing is off limits and no holds barred. We're saying, "I'm glad it's gone," and I will shout from the rooftops, "I am one of those people." I did not like playing against this card. It created too many game states where I was like, anybody got something? Anybody, are you gonna, okay, he's got that, I can't do this, I can't wheel, I can't do this. Oh, he wheeled, great. Well, I guess let's just wait for the game to be over then. And I was glad to see it go. We've seen too many unfun game states derived directly from this card. And so I am definitely on that camp that I'm glad that it's gone. But I just think it's also very interesting that so many other people in the cEDH community agreed with me. And I don't know if everyone thought that that was going to be the case. I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, here come the angry cEDH players going to come in and start screaming.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I think largely the response to Paradox Engine, I think that Hullbreacher and Paradox Engine are actually very similar bans in terms of reaction,
I agree.
And that's that, like, they were useful and applicable in cEDH games in whatever, and they weren't particularly controversial, right? Like, you got, Notion Wheeled or whatever, and, like, it sucked, but, like, okay, it's kind of what you signed up for. And, same thing with Paradox Engine. If somebody storms off for 20 minutes or whatever, okay, yeah, it's kind of what you signed up for, or you just scoop, But I think that the primary difference between the Hullbreacher ban and the Paradox Engine ban in terms of public perception, there was a little bit more of pushback against the Paradox Engine ban because I think it did dovetail with Flash making Protean Hulk a problem, right? When Paradox Engine was banned, Flash Hulk became more effective because Paradox Engine was one of the only ways that non-Flash Hulk decks could compete with Flash Hulk decks, So when it went away, it kind of pushed a whole bunch of decks that were kind of nipping at the heels of Flash Hulk. It pushed them into obscurity, and then you only had Flash Hulk. And it was just like, this is the one shining deck, and that's it. And it's no longer this, and then Paradox Engine, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, But with Hullbreacher, it really wasn't a central piece. I mean, it was a central piece to some decks, but it wasn't like the only other competitive decks in the format, It's not like now there is only one thing, and that was the 1A that is no longer here. So I think that a lot of the cEDH community, this is my analysis of it, but I think that a lot of the cEDH community is more accepting of the Hullbreacher ban because it wasn't like a central piece of the second best deck, because it's really tough to swallow. It'd be like if in a competitive format like Modern or whatever, if you say whatever, Dredge, I'm not sure what the best deck in Modern is right now, but if you say like Dredge is the best deck and Affinity is the only deck that can play against it, and then banning Affinity into Oblivion and then just leaving Dredge as the only deck to play,
Exactly.
That's really tough as like somebody that cares about that kind of meta. It's really tough to swallow, even if you understand the rationale behind it. And I don't think that was necessarily there with Hullbreacher. So I think the people that would have been upset if it caused real meta problems weren't upset because it's like they get it. They're not dumb.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that also it's a situation where Paradox Engine and Flash being the two kind of premier things, and Paradox Engine got banned, and then Flash got banned, and then here comes Hullbreacher, which a lot of people in cEDH were playing with and stuff. So I can see why some people were thinking that this was a cEDH ban. And it's actually good to hear that it wasn't. And I'm glad that it's gone, like I had said. But also at the same time, this didn't like strip a deck away, and it's creating these new nemesis, these new like arch enemies, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think it's very positive personally. And whether or not some people will admit it overtly, I'll be the first to shout it from the rooftops. I play cEDH for fun. I play it to have a good time. I just play it in a different way. I'm not here all business, poker face on, shades up. I'm not doing that. And no, other cEDH players aren't doing it either. So sometimes I think there's a misconception there. And I didn't have fun when I was playing against Hullbreacher, just like I wasn't having fun when I was playing against Flash. So I think that they made the right decision, and that's personal opinion. I think they made the right decision in banning Hullbreacher because in my environment, my playgroup, I saw what kind of play styles it was creating. So also speaking of community, there have been a couple of rumblings here and there about a certain part about Hullbreacher being its super aggressive pushed, how pushed it was out of the gate. And some people there are some rumblings in some corners that are saying, this wouldn't have been banned if it were a white card. Do you agree with that? Or what are your thoughts on that? If they had just color shifted it to white and literally everything else was the same, would you think it would have been banned then?
I mean, it's kind of tough, right? Like, that saying, like, if my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bike. Like,
I don't know that, but I'm going to use it from now on. That's a really fun saying.
So it's kind of one of those situations. Like, it's maybe fun to think about as a thought experiment. I don't necessarily know how helpful it is. I think that you probably wouldn't have seen the same play patterns because it would require people to play white. So a little bit of a different situation when you've got a player, like, especially newer players. If you look at like the players that might be cracking a Hullbreacher and putting it into an upgraded precon or like a deck that they've built from stuff around their house, right? They're less likely to put a white Hullbreacher into a deck with wheels. So sure, it probably wouldn't have caused those problems. Because one of the real problems is that, like, Windfall has been printed a lot. It's been printed like 4 times in the past 3 years or something like that.
Number of times, yeah.
There are a lot of copies of Windfall out there in people's collections, in products that they've purchased, all that kind of stuff. Like, Windfalls are out there. Being that it was the same color as Hullbreacher, it's the kind of thing where they're just more likely to end up in the same deck together, even if that's not your intent to weaponize them. Also, I would say that decks that have been kind of conditioning more casual players to look for wheel payoffs exist. So things like the Locust God and Xyrus, those 2 cards, I think, have been kind of like Opus Thief light for the casual community, for quite a while. And so people that play those decks or decks that are like those decks, Nekusar is an older example. Or, these kind of decks that just like punish you for drawing cards or like have some way of capitalizing on it. They're, Hullbreacher can very easily end up in those decks because Locust God is it, and Xyrus, I think, is Sultai. But if Hullbreacher is white, like, those players don't have that in their stable because they're less likely to be playing 4-color partners. They're less likely to be playing, like, Kenrith good stuff, So I think
your very best wheel things are in Grixis colors.
Exactly.
Simple as that.
And so I think if Hullbreacher is white, it probably stays more contained into competitive strategies, and we probably wouldn't be talking about it. So I think that's probably accurate. I don't think it causes a format-wide problem if it's a white card. I think it could very easily have been like 2 colors. Even if it was like, it probably would have been fine. Or, if it was, I don't know. Like, I was saying this about Opposition Agent a while ago, is I think Opposition Agent should have been Orzhov, like 1 white-black. And just restricting the number of decks that something can go into can do a lot to mitigate the, like, accidental usage of it as like an offensive weapon. But yeah, I think it being white would be fine. There's like a ton of different designs that you could have taken with it, right? Like you don't replace the draws, or don't give it flash, or make it like ETB until end of turn or something like that. You know,
I've heard that. Yep. Make it till an end turn only effect.
Yeah, and like Rachel Weeks posted a really great tweet about this a little while ago, and it was I don't know if it was geared at Hullbreacher, but it's definitely applicable. The same logic is if you've got people in your play group that are like maybe bemoaning, you know, that type of effect, like saying, I don't like playing against Hullbreacher. There are often instant speed, like temporary versions of cards that have static effects that are really oppressive, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you think about, let's say Stranglehold or like Ashiok, Dimir Ashiok, or not Dimir, but the War of the Spark one.
That's right. Yeah.
This like preventing you from searching your library. You've got Shadow of Doubt. Right? Yep. Shadow of Doubt is a fine card in its own right. But if your you know, friends are saying like, oh, I really hate playing against Dimir Ashiok, and you take it out of your deck, take out Ashiok and put in Shadow of Doubt. Like, it may be a strict downgrade in terms of raw power or efficacy or whatever, but that has a really positive impact on your playgroup's play experience, because doing it once is like fine, but keeping somebody under your thumb like that can be a miserable experience for them.
That's interesting, having it be spell-based instead of permanent-based.
Yeah, or just like, you know, a one-off instead of a continuous effect. It's a really, really effective way of dealing with, like, of kind of compromising, saying, like, I still want to play this, or I still need this effect for whatever reason, but I'm just going to play, like, a slightly scaled-back version of it. So I can still do it sometimes, but it won't just be, like, the only thing that you have to deal with all game.
Yeah, that actually exists for Notion Thief. There is a card that is a one-shot effect. Want to say I doubt it's Stolen Identity. It's called something, but it's from a while back.
There's like Psychic something or other. There's also
something like
an enchantment that does it. Oh no! I'm thinking of a different one. But
well,
there are one-shot
is a spell that does a Notion Thief thing, and it's showing on your screen right now. Thank you, the magic of editing. And so and that would be actually a really good alternative to these persistent permanent-based effects. I think that's a really good way to put it. So kudos to you, Rachel. So there is one last thing that I do want to say before we wrap up, and that is the 2 new members of the CAG. I talked about them in the beginning of this episode. I really want to reiterate them again at the end of this episode. Every piece of the RC's announcement has been Hullbreacher. This is the Hullbreacher announcement, and it's unfortunate because these 2 great new members and new additions to the CAG have been completely overshadowed by this Hullbreacher ban. So really, get out there and welcome Kristin and Elizabeth to the CAG. They are great additions to it, and I don't want to minimize how great it is to have these new members on the CAG. So thank you for being a part of the CAG, and everybody get out there and thank them as well. So it's unfortunate that they had to all be combined together because, like I said, they got overshadowed. But they are wonderful additions, and we are very grateful for them.
Yeah, I will say, too, that like beyond the fact that they're both extremely capable and intelligent people, this also marks a little bit more global representation in the Commander Advisory Group. I know one of the focuses, and I've been talking to Sheldon about this recently as well, is getting more voices in the community that represent like non-white North American male kind of demographic. And I realize fully that like that's me. Like I'm a 35-year-old white guy, you know?
Same here. Yep.
But it's important because like Magic doesn't look the same everywhere, right? Like Magic in Portland, Oregon might not look the same as Magic in Rio de Janeiro or in Tokyo or in like literally anywhere else, or like Berlin. Like, I don't know about your demographics, but I can tell you that we have a huge contingent of people from Brazil and Germany that watch our stuff. And, but there's nobody on the CAG from Brazil or Germany, right? So one of the things that the Rules Committee is explicitly doing and is committed to doing is getting more voices from more people around the world, more people that don't look like them, you know, and not just look like physical attributes or whatever, but like, you know, people that aren't like, you know, former L5 Magic judges from the Pacific Northwest, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
But just different types of voices, speaking to different types of experiences that people are looking for from the game. You know, it's diversity is absolutely a strength, because if we get more voices on what Magic looks like around the world, we can make better informed choices.
I agree. 100%. And I think they did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
All right, and with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. So really big thanks to Jim for being on the show today. Really appreciate your insights are absolutely wonderful. I'm going to con you into coming every episode, and you're just going to be my unofficial co-host. That's really what it is.
I'm in.
Yeah, cool, sounds good. So really quick, where are some places that people can find you and what's going on in your world?
Yeah, well, people can find me on Twitter, mostly. That's kind of where I hang out the most, either at the Spike Feeders or at JimTSF if you want to get a hold of me directly. That's my private Twitter account. It's not private, but it's like personally for me and not for the
personal
group.
Account, yep. Mm-hmm.
You can also find me on YouTube. That's where I make my content. We've got all sorts of opinion pieces. If you like hearing my thoughts about the format in general, I run a series called Spike on the Mic, where I talk about a lot of philosophical stuff and do interviews like this. We also do Better Know Combo, which is like combo explainer videos if you are into that kind of thing. And we have our first in-person gameplay episode coming out since, I want to say, like August of last year. We haven't done in-person gameplay in forever. And we filmed one last week, and I'm editing it right now. It's coming out at the beginning of August, so I'm super excited for that to come out too.
Oh, me too. That's so exciting. I'm so glad to hear that. All right, cool. All right, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. So thank you all very much for listening and watching. And be sure to tune in next time to the Playing with Power podcast when we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Thank you very much. See you later.